Everyone, it is 6:30 on the dot, so we are going to get going because I think we will have an amazing lecture tonight and lots of questions. So my name is Amy Rowe with Rutgers Cooperative Extension of Essex and Passaic Counties, way up north. So I want to welcome you to our second of our New Jersey Renewable Energies in the Garden State fall series that we have as a partnership between Earth Day Every Day and the Marine Extension Program Seminar Series. So we're very excited to have our speaker, Dr. Dunbar Birnie, and I will introduce him in a second, but I need to go over some logistics and some details that we need to address before we get going tonight. So just bear with me while we get through all of this. So this program will have a poll at the end of it. We would like to see what knowledge you have gained and what actions you will consider taking related to solar and related to what's being discussed today. But in order to collect information that you would be providing, we need your consent to take part in the study. This is a requirement of the Institutional Review Board whenever we are working with human subjects. And so if you do not feel comfortable doing this, please answer no to the consent question at the beginning of the poll, which will occur at the end of this program. It'll pop up about 5 or 10 minutes before the end of the lecture. But please, we would really enjoy it if you would send us that information, and please say yes if you consent. It is an anonymous poll, and we will not know your name or your answers. We will just be collecting them as an aggregate. But if you have any questions about this, please contact me directly. Here's all my information. And we are very concerned about everyone's rights. So we just wanted to make sure you're aware of this, but we would love it if you would answer our poll. So please consider it. So Rutgers Cooperative Extension is an equal opportunity program provider and employer. And so we want to make sure that we are meeting everyone's needs. And if you need any accommodations, please let us know. But we are trying very hard to not discriminate against anyone. And this is in accordance with federal law and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which is funding Rutgers Cooperative Extension. So if you have any questions about that, you can check out this website. And we are trying to be as inclusive as possible. So just keep that in mind also. So some other logistics for tonight: the chat is disabled. Please submit all of your questions through the question and answer button. It is a symbol at the bottom of your Zoom web, your Zoom toolbar that has two little cartoon bubbles talking to each other. It says Q&A. We will be taking questions throughout the lecture, but I will be passing them along to our speaker towards the end of the program unless there's something that needs clarification right away. So we will be collecting those. We will try to get to as many questions as possible, but please know that we're not going to be able to take all questions, and so we appreciate your understanding on that. But we are also providing this program for free. And if you would like to donate to our Rutgers Cooperative Extension Earth Day Every Day programming and help us fund some of our other activities, like providing field trips and scholarships for the Rutgers Environmental Stewards Program, you can please check out our website, and I will put that donation link in the chat after we get going with our speaker tonight. So I am going to stop sharing my screen and I will introduce our speaker. So today we have, hold on, let me get this. I have Dr. Dunbar Birnie joining us. We are very excited to have him here. He is a professor for Rutgers University. He works in materials science and engineering. His research areas include photovoltaic devices, solar power systems, renewable energy storage in vehicle batteries, and he is a materials engineer. He has worked at University of Arizona, and he has also worked for GE and some other amazing places. So we would like to welcome Dr. Dunbar Birnie, and thank you for supporting us tonight.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I'm happy to be here. I can see a more than 50 people signed up. Very good. It's great to be here. Before I start my slides, I've chosen a background picture that is actually a Rutgers solar array. It's part of a current ongoing research effort that I'll talk about a little bit at the end, but um, um, sort of we'll maybe be able to refer to it once we get to those slides, but let me get started here. Okay, so yeah, as Amy indicated, I'm at Rutgers in material science and engineering, and but I've really benefited by collaborating quite extensively with other departments. So I've put a logo for the Blaustein School, and I've worked with the Center for Green Building. We've been doing an assessment of technical potential for solar in the state. And I put a logo for this agrivoltaics program where we've been looking at the potential for land to be used both for farming and solar array collection simultaneously. Um, so really that's a multidisciplinary area, and I'm really pleased to have collaborators in all these areas. And I also mentioned with appreciation my PhD student, Ross Rucker, who has been supported through the agrivoltaics program and done a whole bunch of work on um, modeling solar performance for different kinds of agrivoltaic arrays. So, um, okay, let's see how to advance. Okay, so this is going to be quite a wide range of topics. I think many of you are familiar with um, solar, and you see them regularly on people's houses. So I'm going to cover just a little bit about how the photovoltaics work, but then look at some more of the practical aspects about how it works on the roof of your house. How big of an issue is it about what direction your roof is pointing, and then introduce some of the regulatory constraints on what you can install, and give you some advice about how you might be able to assess your own home. Then eventually I'll get to explaining the new state um, community solar program, where it makes it possible for you um, to participate in solar, but not actually have it on your own roof. And so that's kind of interesting. And then I'll throw in a few extra things at the end, including some overview of the agrivoltaics work. So here's a picture of a solar module. I happen to have in a slide deck, and they all look pretty much like this. Most of the ones that you can buy are built with silicon. Actually, these have an appearance that looks a little mottled. So these are polycrystalline silicon wafers. And then the lines that you can see that run vertically are printed on metallization that would allow for the electrical contacts to be made. So it's important that these are semiconductor materials. The silicon is a semiconductor, and we are just like when we make transistors or memory circuits, we can do electrical modification of the semiconductor in either positive or negative ways. And so what's critical in the operation of solar modules is that we're actually making a kind of a sandwich structure where there's a positive layer and a negative layer in direct contact, what we call a PN junction. And so this PN junction does the electrical magic that converts photons into electricity. So when we think about sunlight, we mostly are familiar with the visible wavelengths, red, green, and blue, but there is a little bit of ultraviolet and there is a lot of infrared. And so only some of those photons can be absorbed by silicon, but the ones that are absorbed, each photon has the opportunity to generate one electron converted traveling through the circuit. So we get current and voltage out and electrical power. So it converts photons into electrons, and it's on a basically 1-for-1 ratio, where the brighter the sunlight, the more electricity we'll have. And so when you buy a solar module or a solar array, you would have information about how much power each module has. And so that power rating is established under what are called standard testing conditions, which are equivalent to the maximum sunlight that you might expect. So we aren't always getting that much sunlight, so the output power is not always the same, and it depends on time of day and season, as I'll show. Okay, so but it has a rating, and we would design that rating to match the expectations for energy generation and go from there. So some features that you might see in a spec sheet that was for a commercial solar module product would be physical dimensions and operating electrical characteristics. And so this might be important for the installer because there would be actually dimensions for the rack and how you would, or for the framing and how you would attach that to the rack on your roof or wherever it's built, including mounting holes and sizes and where the wires are and everything. Important electrical measurements that come out or that are important are would a typical operating voltage be, and how much current would be delivered, again, at standard test conditions, maximum sunlight. So a single module might operate at, well, here this one's almost 30 volts. And then these are DC outputs. And so one module would be connected to the next module. You would build a string of modules, and the voltages would add up, and that would feed into an inverter, and that would convert it from DC to AC. So you would have an output power that would scale with the brightness. So here we are in New Jersey, and you have the sense that, okay, sunlight here is pretty good, but there are places in the US where you have quite a bit more sunlight. And so the Department of Energy has a national lab devoted entirely to renewables. NREL is out in Colorado, and they provide a number of resources that are useful for us all to evaluate, is it going to be sensible for us to do solar, and what are the expected energy generation that we might have. So this map actually is averaging over an entire year, but mapping out for our location. And then the units, they're kind of small, but I'll explain. The units are in watt hours. This is of sunlight per square meter per day on average through an entire year. So actually here in sort of at the blue and green border, then we might be getting 3,000 or 4,000 watt hours per square meter per day. And then that would translate into a certain amount of sunlight. They would convert into a certain amount of electricity, as we can see. But here, in Death Valley or Arizona, then you get almost twice as much sunlight. And so what that means is that during the normal operation, when you're generating electricity in kilowatt hours, the energy is something you would be normally buying, but now it's generating from sunlight. And so you would pay your solar array back quite a bit faster if you lived in an area where there's more sunlight. But, so California and New Jersey have been quite proactive in making and giving incentives. So we actually have quite a respectable amount of solar installed in the state. And but that is what sunlight we have. So we make do the best we can. Just to give you an average of, I mentioned that in our area, we're getting something like 3,000 or 4,000. So if we look through the year, this is for a full 365 days. Actually, I plotted it by hours, but you can see seasonally in the summer, we get quite a bit more. In the winter, not so much. And, but on average, we would be in that close to 4,000 watt hours per square meter per day average. And, there are weather patterns. So, clouds come and it rains every once in a while. So there is quite a lot of variability. And the modules will be outputting power in proportion to that brightness. And the inverter will convert whatever it can, whatever's being generated, into alternating current AC back into the grid. So in the way that we process the light irradiance for different kinds of modeling of performance, it's actually important to know that whether the sunlight is coming directly from where the sun is in the sky, or whether it's bouncing off dust or clouds, or ends up being more diffuse in how it's accessing a solar module. And so in most of our simplest kind of expectations about how to optimize the solar output, we often think about exactly where is the sun, and try and tilt them. Most normally for us, since we're in the northern hemisphere, then you'd be tilting it southwards. Or there are actually motorized tracking systems that would then follow the sun as it's moving through the day, and seasonally what the variations are. But both of these are important for us in New Jersey. So here are 3 different locations, sort of north to south. And if we count again in kilowatt hours, so these are now thousands of watt hours per meter squared per day, we see that there's a lot of diffuse light, and maybe 2 to 3 ratio, 60% is direct, but 40% is diffuse. And for the diffuse light, it won't really matter which direction you're pointing. You might be fine just having the modules lay flat. But for the direct irradiance, then it does matter the motion of the sun. And that often drives our thinking about where things should be installed and what energy effects are going to be possible. And so that, let me going back here, we have such a large seasonal variation, partly because we're at almost 40 degrees north latitude. So when we map out the places where the sun travels in the sky, then it is really emphasizing that southern exposure. And so often we would whether it's on our house or in a field, would be mostly driven to tilt things toward the south. And then we would expect in the morning, we have the sun come up in the east. But actually, depending on the summer or winter, then the arc of the sun can be very close to the ground and hardly shine at all. And so that influences the electrical output. But mostly we're adding that up over an entire year, and we're optimizing systems over an entire year because we expect that the payback for a solar array might take many years, several years, and there may be weather variations as were expressed here. Next year will be different than this year. We don't know what those peculiarities are, but it's important that overall we'll be averaging to get something quite consistent year by year. Okay. So, here's a picture I got online showing a solar on a house, and everybody's house is different. So you have different sections that are tilted different amounts. There's the possibility that even different parts of your house might some time of the day shade. So this section doesn't look like it's going to get the same amount of sunlight as this section or that section. But the tilting angle and the azimuth or the aspect orientation of the house influences how much electrical power will be generated. And so, let's see. So one resource that if you are interested in understanding your own house and what the opportunities were for adding solar at home, then there's what's called Google's Project Sunroof. So that logo's up here. And I'm sure you can find that online. But essentially, you can put in your address and find out whether your house is good for solar. And of course, they're going to tell you, yes, it's good for solar. And maybe connect you with installers who would be happy to do the work. But you can see they have a brightness scale here, and so north is up. So the south facing roof segments are brighter, and that's because they get that, they're pointed closer to where the sun is actually in the sky as it moves through the seasons. So here's a close-up of, this is actually I thought this was neat because it shows some of the other effects. Their modeling is based on LiDAR scans of your property. And so there is quantitative information about the slope that they can extract from LiDAR. And there's information about trees surrounding. And so you can see that those are in some ways blocking part of this roof. And so it would be silly to put solar modules under a tree. And that is something that Google Project Sunroof is then able to look at the house area and the shading patterns for the tilt and the shading for trees, and then come up with an assessment of what might be a reasonable amount of solar that you could put on this roof. And okay, so in the context, I may have should I go ahead to a question now? I'm happy to.
Is now a good spot?
Well,
Got a couple.
sure. There's a couple, and maybe they relate to things I'm showing. So let's do it.
Okay, so the first one is, what is your opinion of roof photovoltaic panels versus actual roof shingles that supposedly have solar built in?
Um, I have not looked at the price or the performance specs for the shingles compared to modules. I know that for the modules, there's been such a efficiency of mass production, mostly in China, but other places, that the prices have come down substantially. So I would be surprised if the shingles could, of any brand, I don't care who makes them, I think the added complexity of how they're built um, probably means they'll be more expensive, but they might look better, and that would be a choice that you'd have to make about how you spend your money.
Okay, thank you. Then we just have a comment that the object is not to have a groomed lawn landscape. We should be using native plants that do not need regular watering.
Well, yeah, so maybe I used the wrong house to show off, but you'd most typically put solar on the roof, and you could landscape any way you want below. It doesn't interfere with the sunlight that would be needed for the plants because it's not really causing shadow, but it would um, uh, essentially act as the same as the roof. So an important consideration in installing at home is that you're not the incentives that are designed are only allowed for you to generate as much power as much energy as you use in a year for your house. So let me go back to the tilting effect and talk about how much impact that has on your energy production. So I mentioned that we most typically are favoring southward facing roof segments. And so I've done a calculation here for a 10 kilowatt system. And so maybe you would have modules that nowadays, some of the bigger modules that you can get might have 500 watts. And so here, this would be an array that had 20 modules arranged some way on your roof. And then you would have looked at your roof and decided what are the best parts. And now I want to show, well, how big of an issue is it whether your roof is tilted 30 degrees or 20, or if it's totally flat? And so it turns out that, okay, here I have a graph, but it doesn't go to zero. These are, even when we get to an ideal optimum tilt, we're only getting just under 20% better than if they were just laying flat. So thinking about that in the reverse, even a flat roof can capture about 80% of what you might get if you optimize it some way by tilting. So most installers now are installing at the angle that your roof is. They're not going to try and beef it up and put it to a more ideal tilt because it doesn't really make so much difference. Once you get close to the peak, you're doing a great job. I mentioned
Okay.
motorized tracking, and so now this is not something that you would put on your house, but you can find arrays that have row after row of modules, and again, they, because they're tracking the sun, they do better, but it's not double. It's not, it's a little bit better. And so these are things that you can plug in for your exact location through this software called PV Watts. Um, again, created by the National Renewable Energy Lab. And so when you plug in your tilt and how big your array is, it tells you how many kilowatt hours you're generating per year, what they're expecting. And then that turns out to be real financial value. That's depending on what you pay for a kilowatt hour, then this turns into um, a financial income for as long as the array is operating. Okay, so I mentioned that in the getting a quote from an installer, they might ask for your electric bill to be able to make sure that the amount of energy that is generated per year is going to be consistent with the amount of energy that you use every year. So let me go back to this chart. Clearly the sunlight is so different that you're generating a lot during the summer and hardly anything in the winter. But the rules are, it doesn't matter when it's generated. If you're connected to the grid, then you will have net metering. So then sometimes the meter will run backwards, and sometimes you might be buying electricity. But both the buying and selling are done at the same retail rate, and ends up being uh, the grid acts as storage, and your meter runs backwards. And so those installers um, don't I mean, there's a limit to the amount that you use. And so you can't put in double the size array and get twice as much value and push all that into the grid. You really have to balance it with what your usage is. And so from data that we've been examining for the installations in New Jersey, then very often the newer installations are probably about the right size to generate all of the electricity that you need during the year. And the installers, they'll be working from, actually, and maybe I have, let me come back to it. So they'll work from your electric bill and make reasonable estimates about what will fit in the profile, and make sure that it matches your energy usage needs. So actually, if you have a swimming pool and you use a lot of energy for heating that, then probably you qualify for a bigger array. It's kind of nice, but obviously within that limit. Okay, so thinking of that installation at home, that array goes on your roof somewhere. You'll have an inverter that plugs into the grid. And you might also be interested in battery storage or electric vehicle charging. Right now, if you don't have battery storage, if you just have your array and inverter, then if the grid goes down, then the inverter is required to turn off the solar array. So when we have a bad power storm outage, basically the solar is turned off until the grid comes back on. And so that's one reason that you might want battery storage, would be that then you can have an inverter that's smart and says, okay, well, I've got a battery here. The grid goes down, it will cut off from the grid and operate as sort of an electrical island, and be able to, cool your refrigerator, run the microwave, whatever you need, based on the energy that's stored there. And during the day, your solar could fill the battery up again. So you might be able to operate for quite a long time without having a grid to feed into. Actually, many of us are interested in electric vehicles. I've recently acquired an EV, and I plug in at home. So an electric vehicle is another big load. And so it ups your annual energy usage, and then might end up allowing you to qualify for a bigger array. There are scenarios, I don't think, this is a Nissan Leaf cartoon or picture. I don't think they're being sold this way in the US yet, but the battery that you have here could act like a battery storage that might be installed other ways in your garage. So the car itself might be able to plug in and be able to feed your house during the storm, but that's not normally done. But it's an opportunity area in the future. Okay, so if you're interested in the solar of all the programs, I really encourage checking out the New Jersey's Clean Energy Program website. And so, I think it's here, over 180,000 solar installations to date, and this gets updated every month. So it's something to be really proud of. They have lots of informative information about what you can get, what your different utility areas are, everything, and including the pricing of the incentives, that what are called SRECs, the solar renewable energy certificates. One thing that I like that the state is pointing out is that they've posted what they are calling a solar scam warning. And so I've been framing the pictures and these drawings and using Project Sunroof from the point of view that you might be having a conversation with an installer who would have knocked on your front door and might be telling you things like it's free, or the state of New Jersey is sponsoring this program, and it's free. So here's the warning: the state does not have a program that offers free solar, and so in contrast, the programs that an installer might be selling are going to be some kind of well, of course, they would be happy to sell you the solar array that fits on your roof if you have the money in the bank, or if you wanted to borrow your own home equity loan to install, then they'll be happy to build it for you. But they have figured out how to do financing in a way that is zero money down, and then a contracted electricity rate over time, and that might wrap in these renewable energy credits, and it seems free, and you will be getting solar on your roof. It's just a different financing model. So I think it's unfortunate that companies have oversimplified what they're selling and making it sound like it ought to be free. There's no free lunch, and there's no free solar. So, but it isn't something that you should be offended. Think about the potential value that you have. Maybe, I think there are many cases in fact, for municipal customers, schools, you don't have a budget for putting a big solar array on, and it might make sense to finance it with the $0 down kind of arrangement. And so, in the parlance of the industry, this might be called a power purchase agreement. You would buy the electricity at a lower rate than what you were paying before, but you agree to buy that for a period of time. So it's complicated. There, for residential owners or solar, you might also be planning for, how easy will your house be to resell, and that might be influenced by whether you have any restrictions in the contract that you sign. And so you have to read the fine print and understand what would happen if you needed to move and sell your house. Okay, so I mentioned the net metering part. And so maybe I won't spend so much time here. The meter does run backwards when you're generating more, but it is on the annual basis that your usage should be planned. Okay, so here I'm a customer with PSE&G, and so your service territory governs who you would be getting your electric bills from. But I copied this from ours to illustrate where you might get the information that an installer might need. And so here this was saying my home is using too much energy, and then it gives a graph of what my month by month usage has been for the last year. And so again, averaging that out, probably I'm in the range of 1,100 kilowatt hours per month. And adding that up for a year then would allow an installer to know how much solar could be reasonably sold to me and hopefully would fit on my roof. So that would be data that you'd want to have available to talk to an installer. Okay, so another cool opportunity area. Not every roof. I mean, we have trees around our house, and so far don't have solar. But there are new programs in the state called community solar, where the solar array would be installed somewhere else, and you would contract with the solar owner to buy your electricity that had been generated at a solar array nearby. And so again, this is at the New Jersey Clean Energy Program website, and one of these clicks here would get you to the community solar. And what's even better is that they have a one of the links here is a community solar project finder, so you can plug in your address and it takes you to a website sponsored again by the Board of Public Utilities and Sustainable Jersey. You enter your zip code, and just to show you what I found, here's the top two, but I found there were 17 projects that I would qualify for, and for our particular location. And they give details: who is the owner of the array. You can click to sign up or get more information. The estimated savings are presented. So for these both were about 20%. There are some times where customers who are low or middle income may be able to get an even better price reduction. So if you don't like how solar looks, you can still use solar and use the lookup tool here provided at the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities Clean Energy website. Okay. So yeah, so I should probably wrap up and we'll do some more questions. I just wanted to mention a couple more things. There is a very ambitious energy master plan designed, built by the state, and it requires lots of renewable energy to be added. So there are many projects that are trying to be built and often require many, maybe hundreds of acres of land. And then often these grid scale would be feeding power not into your local utility, but into the transmission network at wholesale prices. So these are complicated, but often very large arrays and require some grid modifications. Um, in those projects, there's often some discomfort at the fact that we're using land and that land has other kinds of productivity. So there is now a pilot program launching in this area of dual use. Can we maintain agriculture and still have solar energy production? And so this is a program that is just now being rolled out by the Board of Public Utilities. And but within the next 3 years, we expect that there will be many farms that would then build solar in a way that it might be possible to continue doing farming underneath the arrays. And so generally, what I've been talking about are on your house, they're attached and they're fixed, they're tilted some way. And I mentioned the trackers, how that generates more energy. I'll show you a picture what those look like. Actually, the one in my virtual background is a single axis tracking array at the Rutgers Snyder Farm, and it's part of a dual use research program that we're engaged in now. There's a third area which is kind of novel for ag and this dual use is called vertical bifacial, and they're enabled by modules that have the front and the back are glass, and then light can come in from either side. And so in thinking about an agricultural context, then we might be raising the arrays up higher. We're going to be collecting the direct and the diffuse irradiance. And then what's going to be important is what is the shadow effect that we experience down at ground level where plants might be growing. And so these issues of tilting and placement and row width, all of these have an influence in what our sunlight availability is for farming. Most of the electrical output can be predicted the same way as we were doing for our home, but would be extended to the size of whatever array is built at the farm. So a fixed tilt array most often would be lined up in rows that run east-west and are tilted south. Single axis here, this is a version that has been raised up, but then these are motorized and are able to track the sun through the day. In the case here, we have that sun pattern again. In the case of a tracking array, then the shadow moves back and forth as the sun rises in the east and goes down in the west. Then the shadow pattern here is moves, and so it's spread around to the land below for agricultural use quite nicely. For those single axis trackers, they're most frequently installed aiming north-south, and then they tilt east or west and through the day, and then the shadows are moving that way too. And then this shows this vertical bifacial where you can see the front and the back both look the same. They're glass. Light can come in from either side. And then these are held in an orientation where it doesn't matter how big the equipment is, as long as you've planned the width, and then you can harvest. Here it's just hay, but you could grow whatever crop you wanted. And in this case, these vertical bifacial are typically mounted in rows running north-south. And so the shadow patterns again would track the east-west motion and then allow for nice uniform sunlight on the ground level in between the rows. Yeah, so probably that. I mean, I see there's a range of questions piling up. I haven't been able to look at them, but But really, solar is ready, and you can put them on your house, or you can do community solar. And we need to do more to achieve the energy master plan goals, and get to net zero. And um, and so you might combine those with EV ownership. Everything, we know how to convert buildings to electricity, electric vehicles, everything. So visit that Clean Energy Program website, and you can see a lot of programs that you might be able to participate in.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Birnie. I am going to launch the poll real quick before everyone drops off. Please go ahead and answer that, and we will get to questions. There are quite a few, and some of them are related. So
Great.
before we get to some of the harder hitting questions, I've had a question that's been here since last week when we had Dave on. So how do you keep solar panels clean of debris and bird and animal poop?
It's funny. Probably most of you on the call, I don't know if I need to share, maybe I'll go over to this. Most of you on the call would, as you drive around in some parts of the state, you'll see these individual modules on the utility poles. And so those are generating power and feeding it into the grid. But those are also places where you might notice the bird poop. And so if you have an array, for example, the one behind me is tilting and tracking through the day, and every once in a while you'll have rainfall, and it mostly washes things off. If you have, we don't actually know for those vertical bifacial how much soiling there will be, but you might every once in a while, once a year, or I think most houses, it's not safe to go up and wash your solar array, but it does influence the electrical output a little bit. So you might, and I think for arrays that are closer to the ground, the fixed tilt, then there might be an operating or maintenance plan to do it at regular intervals.
Hey, thank you. Now here's an important question. In terms of determining whether solar panels will be sufficient on a home to meet needs, is it possible to make projections based on future goals of home EV charging, converting gas furnaces to electric heat pumps, things like that?
I think presently it is, maybe there's someone here who is more knowledgeable than I, but I don't think that the current rules allow you to make projections that way. So yes, when you buy an EV and charge at home, then that's real, that's going to add to your electric bill, and you might not know yet what your usage pattern will be and how much energy that is. So, and the question includes some really other very important things. You might be converting from natural gas heat to a heat exchanger kind of a system, which would then be operating the compressor by electric. But in fact, those compressors have amazing coefficients of performance. So the amount of energy used is relatively small compared to the amount of energy that is heated, or bringing heat in, or bringing air conditioning in. So those are conservation measures that people should be considering. Those are more complicated to think about, because often you have complexities of what's the existing ductwork. Do you do it on a room by room basis? I don't know that it's that easy to make energy projections about what you would be doing, but those are absolutely wonderful things to do.
Okay, thank you. So Colleen had a question. Are there any particular safety considerations associated with battery storage of solar?
So um, there's probably more safety considerations for the battery part, but the solar modules themselves are not dangerous. They are at a higher, when you add a string of modules together, then you could get to a very high DC voltage, which could be unsafe. But the National Electric Code requires that to be out of reach. So you're not going to be exposed to any electricity that's dangerous. The things that I would worry about for batteries is there are some limited occasions of battery fires, and so it's it might be something that ought to be on a pad outside your house rather than inside the garage, or certainly probably not in the basement until we get more experience with the battery chemistries. But those are mostly lithium batteries, and so they have the same laptop fire potential um, that is sometimes in the news.
Gotcha. Thank you. So Thomas has a question. If someone's roof had plenty of more energy than their home uses, wouldn't it be best for the environment if one could install extra modules and sell the excess back to the grid or to neighbors that might have shaded roofs?
Um, you might be able to get permission to connect up to your neighbor from your roof. I've never really heard of that happening. I know of a case where the load that was being balanced was a neighboring factory. So it was a corporate, not it was a commercial larger array feeding a neighboring building owned by a different owner. But then that was still an electric bill's historical usage that was able to be used for that net metering requirement. That rule has a history from a long time ago. Essentially, the utilities, PSE&G, Atlantic City Electric, all of the utilities have been given essentially monopoly territories, and so they are generating and distributing power. And then if you were to put more solar on your roof, and essentially they were forced to buy it, then you would becoming a little utility competitor. And so um, the way the rules were agreed was just to let people become um, over generators and not to let them add in. Now, there are adjustments now being made in California about the net metering rule. And essentially, there would be when you feed power in, you might not get the same price back as you would pay for the electricity if you use it. So what's called the feed in tariff might be adjusted. So far, there's been no movement in New Jersey to do anything that would reduce the net metering, but it, it could happen.
Okay, well, speaking of net metering, if you have access to unused land, the law says you can't install panels and batteries to contribute to the grid. That's a question.
Well, so if you have land, then you can explore installing. And so I had on one of my slides the topic grid scale solar. So that would be a case where maybe hundreds of acres presently not being used would then be a giant utility scale, and it would then be a power plant, and it would feed into the wholesale. And so that is permitted. But the wholesale value of electricity is quite smaller than what we pay at retail. And so you'd have to work with the bank and figure out whether it was worth it to do that. Oftentimes there are permit issues that make it a slow process to actually, okay, if you have a piece of land how long does it take to actually get through all of the permits, and whether a township will approve your proposal or not. This is all slow moving bureaucracy. But that can
Yeah.
be done. That can be done.
Okay, I just want to have a quick reminder, please take the poll if you haven't already. We're still only about 50% on that. Please take a look. But I have a couple of questions that are asking, how come solar companies are not utilizing parking lots or existing rooftops of buildings? If every megastore roof or parking lot was covered with solar panels, it would add up to a lot of acreage.
Well, so most of the installations get developed based on a financial calculation. Is it going to be cheaper to install something, and given the amount of electricity that could be generated? And so um, for parking canopies in particular, the structures are kind of expensive. You have a lot of steel work, a serious foundation. And I know that Rutgers has recently engaged in installing a bunch of parking canopy arrays, and they've figured out a way to make that be cost effective. So the power or the energy that's generated is cheaper than what we've been buying, and so it penciled out. And now existing buildings, it's interesting. Rutgers has, for over the 3 campuses, more than 1,000 buildings, but rarely have there been any solar installed on roofs. And a lot of that is, I think, perceived um, worries about repair or maintenance issues for the roof itself. If you put a solar array on and you need to fix a leak, then how do you go and do it? The buildings are old and might need to be repaired. So I think that many companies also go through that same sort of a thought process. But it's absolutely true. And some of the biggest arrays that I know of are on warehouses like Amazon warehouses and so forth. Those are excellent places. And usually the solar isn't that heavy. It's a large expanse. They're mostly put in relatively flat. It's a good way to go. Those are cases where the array might then be suitable for community solar. There'd be a neighborhood that could take advantage of it, but so forth.
Okay, so we are running out of time here, but since you just mentioned community solar, there is a question about, is there a feedback study from buyers and users of the community solar program? Have we seen how community solar is impacting neighborhoods and how it works in the communities?
Um, I don't know of any studies that really speak to the community impact. Certainly, as I showed in the numbers, the cost is a little bit less, so that's a favorable impact. And to the extent that might make it accessible to a home renter. So a renter in an apartment block or renting a home then would be able to participate in solar for their electricity without having to worry, figure out how to install there. So that has an advantage that makes it maybe more accessible into low and moderate income state residents.
That's great, thank you. And I did have a participant who said that he's participating in the community solar program and his electricity bill has been reduced by 30%. So that's
Nice.
significant for sure.
Yep.
So we are out of time. I do have a couple of extra questions, but if you would like, I can pass those along to you and we can collect answers and get them out to the group. Some of them are hard hitting and a little more in depth than we could cover here. So, but I want to thank you so much for this very educational program, and you certainly answered all kinds of questions for us and gave a lot of information that was left out of the overview that Dave Specka did last week. So thank you so much. And I want to invite all of the participants today to come back October 23rd. We are focusing on offshore wind with our own Dr. Doug Zemeckis and Dr. Josh Kohut. Will be discussing a very controversial offshore wind program. And then we will also have a webinar on October 30th as well, and that one will be covering the bioenergy and biofuels. So please join us starting in October. But let's thank Dr. Dunbar Birnie, and I'd also like to thank the Earth Day Everyday team here tonight: Jean Epifan, Michelle Backus, Sal Mangiafico, and Steve Yurjo. Doug couldn't be here tonight, but he's part of our team as well, and we're so happy that everyone joined us tonight. And one more plea to take the poll before I close it, but thank you so much for everyone for joining us, and we will be collecting these questions, and we will also get slides and information and resources out to attendees in the coming weeks. So look out for that, and the webinar will be posted on the Earth Day Everyday website, so look for that as well. But thank you, everyone. Have a good night, and we appreciate you joining.
See you later. Thank you.